Hi, friends. It's good to see that you came back today. I'm very excited about where our next chapter is going to take us because I took a little quick sneak peek and saw that the next chapter is called Glinda the Good and the Scarecrow of Oz. So, if anybody knows anything about the Wizard of Oz, we all know that Glinda is the good witch, and that's very exciting to see that she's coming into our story now. So, we're going to start out this afternoon with chapter 13 in The Scarecrow of Oz by L. Frank Baum. And let's just get to it and see what's going on with our friends today. Chapter 13 Glinda the Good and the Scarecrow of Oz. That country south of the Emerald City in the land of Oz is known as the Quadling Country. In the very southernmost part of it stands a splendid palace in which lives Glinda the Good. Whew, excuse me. Glinda is the royal sorceress of Oz. She has wonderful magic powers and uses them only to benefit the subjects of Ozma's kingdom. Even the famous Wizard of Oz pays tribute to her, for Glinda taught him all the real magic he knows, and she is his superior in all sorts of sorcery. Everyone loves Glinda, from the dainty and exquisite ruler Ozma down to the humblest inhabitant of Oz, for she is always kindly and helpful and willing to listen to their troubles, however busy she may be. No one knows her age, but all can see how beautiful and stately she is. Her hair is like red gold and finer than the finest silken strands. Her eyes are blue as the sky and always frank and smiling. Her cheeks are the envy of peach blows, and her mouth is enticing as a rosebud. Glinda is tall and wears splendid gowns that trail behind her as she walks. She wears no jewels, for her beauty would shame them. For attendants, Glinda has half a hundred of the loveliest girls in Oz. They are gathered from all over Oz, from among the Winkies, the Munchkins, the Gillikins, the Quadlings, and as well as from Ozma's magnificent Emerald City, and it is considered a great favor to be allowed to serve the royal sorceress. Among the many wonderful things in Glinda's palace is a great book of records. In this book is inscribed everything that takes place in all of the world just the instant it happens, so that by referring to its pages, Glinda knows what is taking place far and near in every country that exists. In this way, she learns when and where she can help in any distress or danger, and although her duties are confined to assisting those who inhabit the land of Oz, she is always interested in what takes place in the unprotected outside world. Oh boy, who do you think that is? It says, the most popular man in all the land of Oz. Scarecrow. So it was with that on a certain evening Glinda sat in her library and surrounded by a bevy of her maids who were engaged in spinning, weaving, and embroidery when an attendant announced the arrival at the palace of the Scarecrow. This personage was one of the most famous and popular in all the land of Oz. His body was merely a suit of Munchkin clothes stuffed with straw, but his head was a round sack filled with bran, with which the Wizard of Oz had mixed some magical brains of a very superior sort. The eyes, nose, and mouth of the Scarecrow were painted upon the front of the sack, as were his ears, and since this quaint being had been endowed with life, the expression of his face was very interesting and somewhat comical. The Scarecrow was good all through, even to his brains, and while he was naturally awkward in his movements and lacked the neat symmetry of other people, his disposition was so kind and considerate that he was so obliging and honest that all who knew him loved him, and there were few people in Oz who had not met our Scarecrow and made his acquaintance. He lived part of the time in Ozma's palace at the Emerald City, part of the time in his own corncob castle in the Winkie country, and part of the time he traveled over all Oz, visiting with the people and playing with the children whom he loved dearly. It was on one of his wandering journeys that the Scarecrow had arrived at Glinda's palace, and the sorceress at once made him welcome. As he sat beside her talking of his adventures, he asked, "What's new in the way of news?" Glinda opened her great book of records and read some of the last pages. "Here is quite an interesting and curious thing," she announced, an accent of surprise in her voice. Three people from the big outside world have arrived in Jinxland. Where is Jinxland? Inquired the Scarecrow. Very near here, a little to the east of us, she said. In fact, Jinxland is a little slice taken off the Quadling country, but separated from it by a range of high mountains, at the foot of which lies a wide, deep gulf that is supposed to be impassable. Then Jinxland is really a part of the land of Oz, said he. Yes, returned Glinda, but Oz people know nothing of it except what is recorded here in my book. What does the book say about it? Asked the Scarecrow. It is ruled by a wicked man called King Krewel. Although he has no right to the title, most of the people are good, but they are very timid and live in constant fear of their fierce ruler. There are also several wicked witches who keep the inhabitants of Jinxland in a state of terror. Do these witches have any magical powers? Inquired the Scarecrow. Yes, they seem to understand witchcraft in its most evil form, for one of them has just transformed a respectable and honest old sailor, one of the strangers who arrived there, into a grasshopper. This same witch, Blinky by name, is also planning to freeze the heart of a beautiful Jinxland girl named Princess Gloria. Why, that's a dreadful thing to do, exclaimed the Scarecrow. Glinda's face was very grave. She read in her book how Trot and Button Bright were turned out of the king's castle and how they found refuge in the hut of Pon, the gardener's boy. Here's the Scarecrow. Not sure what he's doing here. I'm afraid those helpless Earth people will endure much suffering in Jinxland, even if the wicked king and the witches permit them to live, said the sorceress thoughtfully. I wish I might help them. Can I do anything? Asked the Scarecrow anxiously. If so, tell me what to do and I'll do it. There's Linda talking to the Scarecrow. Oops. Not sure if you saw that picture. Just in case. There you go. For a few moments, Glinda did not reply, but sat musing over the records. Then she said, I am going to send you to Jinxland to protect Trot and Button Bright and Cap'n Bill. All right, answered the Scarecrow in a cheerful voice. I know Button Bright already, for he has been to the Land of Oz before. You remember, he went away from the Land of Oz in one of our wizard's big bubbles? Yes, said Glinda, I remember that. Then she carefully instructed the Scarecrow what to do and gave him certain magical things which he placed in the pockets of his ragged munchkin coat. As you have no need to sleep, she said, you may as well start at once. The night is the same as day to me, he replied, except that I cannot see my way so well in the dark. I will furnish a light to guide you, promised the sorceress. So the Scarecrow bade her goodbye and at once started on his journey. By morning he had reached the mountains and separated the Quadling country from Jinxland. The sides of these mountains were too steep to climb, but the Scarecrow took a small rope from his pocket and tossed one end upward into the air. The rope unwound itself for 100 feet until it caught upon the peak of a rock at the very top of the mountain, for it was a magical rope furnished him by Glinda. Scarecrow climbed the rope, and after pulling it up, let it down the other side of the mountain range. When he descended the rope on this side, he found himself in Jinxland, but at his feet yawned the great gulf which must be crossed before he could proceed any further. Here's the Scarecrow, getting ready to head off on his journey. And here he is again, climbing up and down the mountain with his magical rope from Glinda. The Scarecrow knelt down and examined the ground carefully, and in a moment he discovered a fuzzy brown spider that had rolled itself into a ball. So he took two tiny pills from his pocket and laid them beside the spider, which unrolled itself and quickly ate up the pills. Then the Scarecrow said in a voice of command, Spin, said spin. The spider obeyed instantly. In a few moments the little creature had spun two slender but strong strands that reached across the gulf, one being 5 or 6 feet above the other. When these were complete, the Scarecrow started across the tiny bridge, walking upon one strand as a person walks upon a rope, and holding to the upper strand with his hands to prevent him from losing his balance and toppling over into the gulf. The tiny threads held him safely thanks to the strength given him by the magic pulls. Presently he was safe across the street and standing on the plains of Jinxland. Far away he could see the towers of the king's castle, and toward this he at once began to walk. What do you think's going to happen now, friends? Whew. Chapter 14. The Frozen Heart. In the hut of Pon the gardener's boy, Button Bright was the first to waken in the morning. Leaving his companions still asleep, he went out into the fresh morning air and saw some blackberries growing on bushes in a field not far away. Going to the bushes, he found the berries ripe and sweet, so he began eating them. More bushes were scattered over the field, so the boy wandered on from bush to bush, without paying any heed to where he was wandering. Then a butterfly fluttered by. He gave chase to it and followed it a long way. When finally he paused to look around him, Button Bright could see no sign of Pon's house, nor had the slightest idea in which direction it lay. "Well, I'm lost again," he remarked to himself. "But never mind, I've been lost lots of times. Someone is sure to find me." Trot was a little worried about Button Bright when she woke and found him gone. Knowing how careless he was, she believed that he had strayed away, but felt he would come back home in time, because he had a habit of not staying lost. Han got the little girl some food for her breakfast, and then together they went out of the hut and stood in the sunshine. Pon's house was some distance off the road, but they could see it from where they stood, and the both gave a start of surprise when they discovered two soldiers walking along the roadway and escorting Princess Gloria between them. The poor girl had her hands bound together to prevent her from struggling, and the soldiers rudely dragged her forward from when her steps seemed to lag. Behind this group came King Krewel, wearing his jeweled crown and swinging in his hand a slender golden staff with a ball of clustered gems at one end. "Where are they going?" asked Trot. "To the house of the Wicked Witch, I fear," said Pon. "Come, let us follow them, for I am sure they intend to harm my dear Gloria." "Won't they see us?" she asked timidly. "We won't let them. I know a shortcut through the trees to Blinky's house," said he. So they hurried away through the trees and reached the house of the witch ahead of the king and his soldiers. Hiding themselves in the shrubbery, they watched the approach of poor Gloria and her escort, all of whom passed so near to them that Pon could have put out a hand to touch his sweetheart had he dared to. Blinky's house had 8 sides with a door and a window on each side. Smoke was coming out of the chimney, and as the guards brought Gloria to one of the doors, it was opened by the old witch in person. She chuckled with evil glee and rubbed her skinny hands together to show the delight with which she greeted her victim, for Blinky was pleased to be able to perform her wicked rites on one so fair and sweet as the princess. Gloria struggled to resist when they bade her enter the house, so the soldiers forced her through the doorway, and even the king gave her a shove as he followed close behind. Pon was so incensed by the cruelty shown Gloria that he forgot all caution and rushed forward to enter the house also, but one of the soldiers prevented him, pushing the gardener's boy away with violence, slamming the door in his face. "Never mind," said Trot soothingly as Pon rose from where he had fallen. "You couldn't do much to help the poor princess if you were inside. How unfortunate it is that you are in love with her." "True," he answered softly. "It is indeed my misfortune. But if I did not love her, it would be none of my business what the king did to his niece Gloria. But the unlucky circumstances of my loving her makes it my duty to defend her." "I don't see how you can, duty or no duty," observed Trot. "No, I am powerless, for they are stronger than I. But we might peek in through the window and see what they are doing." Trot was somewhat curious too, so they crept up to one of the windows and looked in. It so happened that those inside the witch's house were so busy they did not notice that Pon and Trot were watching them. Gloria had been tied to a stout post in the center of the room, and the king was giving the wicked witch a quantity of money and jewels which Googly Goo had provided in payment. When this had been done, the king said to her, "Are you perfectly sure you can freeze this maiden's heart so that she will no longer love that low gardener's boy?" "Oh, sure as witchcraft, your majesty," the creature replied. "Then get to work," said the king. "There may be some unpleasant features about the ceremony that would annoy me. So I'll bid you good day and leave you to carry out your contract. One word, however. If you fail, I shall burn you at the stake." Then he beckoned to his soldiers to follow him, and throwing wide the door of the house, walked out. This action was so sudden that the King Krewel almost caught Trot and Pon eavesdropping, but they managed to run around the house before he saw them. Away he marched up the road, followed by his men, heartlessly leaving Gloria to the mercies of old Blinky. When they again crept to the window, Trot and Pon saw Blinky gloating over her victim. Although nearly fainting from fear, the proud princess gazed with haughty defiance into the face of the wicked creature, but she was bound so tightly to the post that she could not do more than to express her loathing. Pretty soon Blinky went to a kettle that was swinging by a chain over the fire and tossed into it several magical compounds. The kettle gave 3 flashes, and at every flash another witch appeared in the room. These hags were very ugly, but when one-eyed Blinky whispered her orders to them, they grinned with joy as they began dancing around Gloria. First one, then the other cast something into the kettle. When, to the astonishment of the watchers at the window, all 3 of the old women were instantly transformed into maidens of exquisite beauty, dressed in the daintiest costumes imaginable. Only their eyes could not be disguised, and an evil glare shone in its depths. But if the eyes were cast down or hidden, one could not help but admire these beautiful creatures, even with the knowledge that they were mere illusions of witchcraft. Trot certainly admired them, for she had never seen anything so dainty and bewitching, but her attention very quickly drew to the deeds instead of their persons, and then horror replaced admiration. Into the kettle old Blinky poured another mess from a big brass bottle that she took from a chest, and this made the kettle begin to bubble and smoke violently. One by one the beautiful witches approached to stir the contents of the kettle and to mutter a magic charm. Their movements were graceful and rhythmic, and the wicked witch who had called them to her aid watched them with an evil grin upon her wrinkled face. Finally, the incantation was complete. The kettle ceased bubbling, and together the witches lifted it from the fire. Then Blinky brought a wooden ladle and filled it from the contents of the kettle. Going with the spoon to the Princess Gloria, she cried, "Love no more! Magic art! Now will freeze your mortal heart." With this she dashed the contents of the ladle full upon Gloria's breast. Trot saw the body of the princess become transparent so that her beating heart showed plainly. But now the heart turned from a vivid red to gray, then to white. A layer of frost formed about it. The tiny icicles clung to its surface. Then slowly the body of the girl became visible again, and the heart was hidden from view. Gloria seemed to have fainted, but now she recovered and opened her beautiful eyes, stared coldly and without emotion at the group of witches confronting her. Hmm. There's the witches taking off, with Trot and Pon watching them. Blinky and the others knew that by one cold look that their charm had been successful. They burst into a chorus of wild laughter, and the 3 beautiful ones began dancing again, while Blinky unbound the princess and set her free. Trot rubbed her eyes to prove that she was wide awake and seeing clearly, for her astonishment was great when the 3 lovely maidens turned into ugly crooked hags again, leaning on broomsticks and canes. They jeered at Gloria, but the princess regarded them with cold disdain. Being now free, she walked to a door, opened it, and passed out, and the witches let her go. Trot and Pon had been so intent upon the scene that in their eagerness they had pressed quite hard against the window. Just as Gloria went out of the house, the window sash broke loose from its fastenings and fell with a crash into the room. The witches uttered a chorus of screams, then seeing that their magical incantation had been observed, they rushed for the open window with uplifted broomsticks and canes, but Pon was off like the wind, and Trot followed at his heels. Fear lent them strength to run, to leap across ditches, to speed up to the hills, to the vault of the low fences as a deer would. The band of witches had dashed through the wood window in pursuit, but Blinky was so old and the others so crooked and awkward that they soon realized they would be unable to overtake the fugitives. So the three, who had been summoned by the wicked witch, just put their canes or broomsticks between their legs and flew away through the air, quickly disappearing against the blue sky. Blinky, however, was so enraged at Pon and Trot that she hobbled on in the direction they had taken, fully determined to catch them in time and to punish them terribly for spying upon her witchcraft. When Pon and Trot had run so far that they were confident that they had made good their escape, they sat down near the edge of a forest to get their breath again, for both were panting hard from their exercises. Trot was the first to recover speech, and she said to her companion, "My, wasn't it terrible?" "The most terrible thing I ever saw," Pon agreed. "And they froze Gloria's heart, so now she can't love you any more." "Well, they froze her heart, to be sure," admitted Pon, "but I'm in hopes I can melt it with my love." "Where do you suppose Gloria is?" asked the girl after a pause. "She left the witch's house just before we did. Perhaps she has gone back to the king's castle," he said. "I'm pretty sure she started off in a different direction," declared Trot. "I looked over my shoulder as I ran to see how close the witches were, and I'm sure I saw Gloria walking slowly away toward the north." "Then let us circle around that way," proposed Pon, "and perhaps we shall meet her." Trot agreed to this, and they left the grove and began to circle toward the north, thus drawing nearer and nearer to old Blinky's house again. The wicked witch did not suspect this change of direction, so she came to the grove, she passed through it and continued on. Pon and Trot had reached a place less than half a mile from the witch's house when they saw Gloria walking toward them. The princess moved with great dignity and with no show of haste whatever, holding her head high and looking neither right nor left. Pon rushed forward, holding out his arms as if to embrace her and calling her sweet names, but Gloria gazed upon him coldly and repelled him with a haughty gesture. At this, the poor gardener's boy sank upon his knees and hid his face in his arms, weeping bitter tears. But the princess was not at all moved by his distress. Passing him by, she drew her skirts aside as if unwilling they should touch him, and then she walked up the path away and hesitated as if uncertain where to go next. Trot was grieved by Pon's sobs and indignant because Gloria treated him so badly, but she remembered why. "I guess your heart is frozen all right," she said to the princess. Gloria nodded gravely in reply, and then turned her back upon the little girl. "Can't you can't you like me even?" asked Trot half pleadingly. "No," said Gloria. "Your voice sounds like a refrigerator," sighed the little girl. "I'm awfully sorry for you, 'cause you were sweet and nice to me before this happened. You can't help it, of course, but it's a dreadful thing just the same." "My heart is froze to all mortal loves," announced Gloria calmly. "I do not love even myself." "That's too bad," said Trot, "for if you can't love anybody, you can't expect anybody to love you." "I do," cried Pon. "I shall always love her." "Well, you're just a gardener's boy," replied Trot, "and I don't think you mounted much too much from the first. I can love the old Princess Gloria with a warm heart and nice manners, but this one gives me the shivers." "It's her icy heart, that's all," said Pon. "That's enough," insisted Trot. "Seeing her heart isn't big enough to skate on, I can't see that she's of any use to anyone. For my part, I'm going to try to find Button Bright and Cap'n Bill." "I will go with you," decided Pon. "It is evident that Gloria no longer loves me, that her heart is frozen too stiff for me to melt it with my own love, and therefore I may as well help you find your friends." As Trot started off, Pon cast one more imploring look at the princess, who returned it with a chilly stare, so he followed after the little girl. As for the princess, she hesitated a moment and then turned in the same direction the others had taken, but going far more slowly. Soon she heard footsteps pattering behind her, and up came Googly Goo, a little out of breath with running. "Stop, Gloria!" he cried. "I have come to take you back to my mansion where we are to be married." She looked at him wonderingly a moment, and then tossed her head disdainfully and walked on. But Googly Goo came beside her. "What does this mean?" he demanded. "Haven't you discovered that you no longer love the gardener's boy who stood in my way?" "Yes, I have discovered it," she replied. "My heart is frozen to all mortal loves. I cannot love you, or Pon, or the cruel king, my uncle, or even myself. Go your way, Googly Goo, for I will wed no one at all." He stopped in dismay when he heard this, but in another minute he exclaimed angrily, "You must wed me, Princess Gloria, whether you want to or not. I paid to have your heart frozen. I also paid the king to permit our marriage. If you now refuse me, it will mean that I have been robbed, robbed, robbed of my precious money and jewels." He almost wept with despair, but she laughed a cold, bitter laugh that passed on. Googly Goo caught at her arm as if to restrain her, but she whirled and dealt him a blow that sent him reeling into a ditch beside the path. Here he lay for a long time, half covered by muddy water, dazed with surprise. Finally the old courtier arose, dripping and climbing from the ditch. The princess had gone, so muttering threats of vengeance upon the king and upon Blinky, old Googly Goo hobbled back to his mansion to have the mud removed from his costly velvet clothes. Well, friends, that's the end of chapter 14. So we're going to stop there for today. What do you think about that? The poor princess has her heart frozen. What do you think will become of her and Pon and Trot? And Googly Goo, well, we don't really care what becomes of him. So if you'll come back tomorrow, we'll read another chapter or two and see if we can see what happens. But with all of that, where do you think the Scarecrow is? What do you think his role is going to be in all of this? He's much loved. I don't know if he could melt a frozen heart, though. All right, friends, goodbye for today. We'll see you later. Bye.